Hello, everybody, and welcome. Those of you that are here on time, thank you for joining at this time. It's fantastic to have you with us. Can I ask you to hang on a second, sorry, clicking on the wrong thing. Can I ask you to introduce yourself in the chat? So it's a fantastic opportunity to come together and to share and connect. So if you're happy to do that, if you let us know who you are, where you work, what you do, and we'll look at how we can get people networked and connected through this session. I'm going to do a quick update from the association and then hand over to our fantastic speaker for today. So I'm Jo Stanford. I head up the Healthcare Project and Change Association. So if it's new to anybody, we are a not-for-profit community interest company, and at the heart of it, we're a community of practice. We're UK-wide, so we've got regional networks in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and across the regions in England. We work really collaboratively with the other professional associations, looking at how we can connect and collaborate. And we've done some really great joint events with some of them and plan to do some more going forward. But at heart, we're also here to support the development of the profession and to professionalise project and change management in the health and care sector. And so part of it's about advocating for the profession and how we develop it. So that's what we are here to do, and it's fantastic that you're a part of it. The community is open to everybody to join and to be part of. So events that are coming up, we have an event on the 4th of February. That's the next one to sign up for, and it's with Ignition Strategy, and it's looking at if only the NHS knew what the NHS knows, a proven case study to release capability and drive productivity and efficiency. And we know how big an agenda item productivity and efficiency is at the moment. So come along to that and find out some hints and tips for how to improve that. We also have some regional network events coming up. So we've got Wales, London and the South East currently scheduled. If your region isn't on there at the moment, you can join any of these, but also keep an eye out because new ones will be added once we get the dates from them. And they're on the events page to go and register for them. We also provide training and support to build skills in your organisation and have a series of essentials programmes that are one-day training events to build capability for those that are either fairly new to it or it's an add-on to another primary profession. And to build the skills, and have a look at our website if you want more details. Now, this session is part of a series that we've been running called Change Under Pressure, and it's in response to all of the significant changes that have been going on across the sector over the last year and will continue to do so. And it's about supporting you and your teams and your colleagues with resilience, with support, with advice, anything that will help you manage this transition period and get out of it healthy and fit for the future. So today's session is going to be on that. I'll come back to that in a little minute. But for organisations that are members, we've got a new offer. So as part of organisational membership, there's going to be some masterclasses and half-day courses added as part of that. You'll get details if your organisation is a member for you to sign up and join those sessions. We also provide other bespoke sessions that includes a lot of things around change management because there's a big area of development there. There's the Change Ninja, there's the Change Workshop, there's Understanding Neuroscience for Change, and then the storytelling. And that's about how you engage people to take them on the journey with you. If you're interested in membership for your organisation, thinking about what the future is going to be in the new financial year and what will help you be kind of fit and effective to deliver on those challenges, do have a chat with us and see what's available to support your organisation maturity and build capability. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and I'm going to introduce David, who is our speaker for today. This is going to be another fantastic session with some absolutely brilliant insights and hopefully something really valuable that all of you can take away from today's session. So David, if I can introduce you, David Bovis, who has really developed an understanding of neuroscience and supporting people to develop that through his fantastic framework and approach. And he's going to give you some valuable insights today. And we're going to get some insights from you about how it impacts you as well. So, David, if I can hand over to you and let you tell the story.
Thanks very much, Jo. So hello, everyone. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. I think just before we get going, I mean, it's always nice on these things because we're detached to try and get a bit of connection going. So just so I know you're not just initials on a screen, Helen, could you run the Menti poll for us, and we'll just let everybody do a little something at the other end and give us some few words. I just want to check in and see how everybody's feeling, really. So yeah, I think if we can see a QR code or
It's dropped in the chat. So if you look in the chat, you can either scan the QR code or click on the link, and the link will open the Menti for you to answer the question. And just while you're doing that, if you've got any thoughts or comments, do share them, put them in the chat, and we will ask David questions at the end or as we go along. But there's also the Q&A bit if you want to ask questions as well. It is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you, and you'll also get a copy of the slides to take away. So we will be turning off any AI notes that people put on this, just because we have our own setup. So don't worry, you're not going to miss out. You get it to take away, okay?
I'm glad we did this. It brings it home, doesn't it?
It's not surprising, but it is sad that that's how many people are feeling at the moment, and the impact of the changes on them.
And so, guys, while you're just doing that, so thanks for this. This is really, really informative for me. Just to give you a bit of background, I've been in change and transformation in industry for 40 years. Worked my way up from shop floor to top floor, and did a lot of studies alongside of it. So I studied philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. And I'll tell you a little bit about the model. It's about keeping it simple, but I'll just wait until this stops moving. But we can see what the biggest words are there. And it's this that gets in the way of any kind of change and transformation, whether it's merger and acquisition or just leading change in any kind of organization. It's the people piece, and it's about how people feel. And we're going to talk about the situation that Joe's explained to me in your arena, which is, you know, these pending shifts and changes, which has got you all under, you know, a question mark. So we are going to focus on that, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background while you're doing this to me and where I'm coming from on this stuff. But yeah, consistently, the behavior, any kind of reaction, response to our environment, as we've seen in these words, is emotional. And a lot of the time, what I'm going to try and cover off today is how we can regulate that a bit, and so you don't feel quite so bad. And if you do have change imposed upon you, you can navigate that. And then if you do end up, you know, in a position where you've got a lead change, use some of what we covered today to inform your approach, so that this isn't the feeling that other people have when you're trying to lead change, which is, you know, across the 40 years of my experience across Europe and China, has been the biggest barrier to change everywhere I've gone, because basically human brains work on the same operating system everywhere. So that's what we're going to get into. So, I mean, that's starting to slow down now. So I think we can probably use what we got there. So, and I mean, these are all fantastic words, and we're going to talk about words and how they work in the brain. So overwhelmed, frustrated, worried, exhausted, frustration, uncertain, apprehensive, confused, under pressure, anxious, sick, you know, mentally unhealthy. And this is the whole point, right? If we got these feelings, then we describe them with words, and that has an impact on the way our brain processes the rest of the world. And that's really what we want to try and look at today. But not many people actually know what a feeling or an emotion is, not biologically, not technically. So we're going to try and unpack that a bit. But before I just sort of start using slides to guide the talk and give you something to look at while I'm banging on from my side, the model I come up with is BTFA, Believe, Think, Feel, Act. It stands for. And the reason it's such a simple set of words is because we have to start where people are at in their heads. And I think everybody understands what they understand from those four words: what we believe, how we think, what we feel, and how we act as an outcome of that. But I want to unpack that a little bit for you as well today, and just give you a bit of a window into the neurological mechanisms that sit behind those words, so we can all get on the same page. So hopefully that's all right. But thanks for that. I mean, I'm just going to grab a picture of that from my end, if that's okay. Indulge me for a second while I grab my camera, because that is, really telling. So thank you very much. Right, let me share my screen, and hopefully I'll pick the right one again. Did you get it? Is that the right one?
That's great.
Super. Okay, so I think some people might have got a handout that we sent out as well, which is a bit of a reflective exercise. So just to cover that off for anybody that did do it, what I want you to know is that there's no right way for any human being to respond to imposed change. We all think differently, we feel differently, and we all process uncertainty in very different ways. And that variation will sometimes be called personality, and that might be the case, but it certainly isn't weakness. And that's the key message. It's just biology. However you're feeling right now is how you're designed to feel, and how your brain's been set up to feel based on your life experience to date. So if you're feeling all those emotions we've just seen, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the key. There's absolutely what you're meant to be doing to help predict and survive the situation that you're facing. So what we can do if we understand that is take some of the mystery away. And when we understand mechanisms, just like if we understand how a car operates because we understand internal combustion engines or batteries these days, we can understand how to regulate and maintain that car and make sure it performs at its best. And it's exactly the same with us. If we can get rid of that mystery and understand the way we function as human beings based on the way our brains are designed to work, which makes it okay for everybody, then we get rid of that self-blame and we get through these situations much more cleanly. So let me just go back across to this screen and we'll start using pictures and having a chat. So I think what many people feel when we have change imposed upon us, it feels personal, right? It's as if there's something wrong with us, or what have I do wrong? Why am I being selected? That kind of thinking goes through our heads. And that's all because we're a prediction machine. We're always looking ahead in seconds, milliseconds, in minutes, days, hours, months, years, and tens of years sometimes. And what our brain's trying to do is use what it's been wired by in life up until now to predict ahead, to say, are we going to be safe? And literally, it's just a part of our defense mechanisms that's natural for all of us. And of course, when you remove stability and you have that agency, that sense of choice removed from you because it's being done to you, the brain's naturally going to respond automatically and rapidly and emotionally, right? And that's not weakness, it's biology doing its job. So understanding this really matters because it removes, like I say, unnecessary doubt, self-blame, and if you have got to navigate change, it's exactly the moment when resilience is most needed. So you don't want your brain to be doing what it does and making you feel bad in the moment where you've got to stay positive and find ways through a dodgy situation. So hopefully that makes sense. And if I press this button, it works. So I think that it's very different imposed change from chosen change. We all like change, actually. We say people resist change, but they don't. We don't. We choose different clothes each day. We get our hair dyed differently or cut differently. We choose different holiday destinations. We move house and spouse sometimes, but we like change if we choose it. The problem is imposed change we don't understand, and that's the big difference because we need the brain to be able to have a sense of agency so it can predict. And when change is imposed and control is removed, the nervous system shifts into threat response. It's as simple as that. So we have inbound sensory stimulus that we're used to. That allows us to predict accurately. When that stimulus changes, the prediction error level increases. And as soon as that happens, it becomes metabolically more taxing. We use more glucose energy. Stress levels go up, which means cortisol levels shift and change. And that neurochemical shift in the brain is what we talk about when we talk about emotions. So when we talk about BTFA, believe, it's about having a wiring pattern that is our neurons, and that's established, like I say, through neurogenesis, neuroplasticity. I'm sure I'm talking to the medical team here, to the converted. This stuff, I hope. But when cells reach action potential and depolarize, we call that an impulse or firing. So we have wiring that fires, And then we get to a point where chemicals are released across the synaptic gap, and that mix of chemicals, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, etc., is going to change the way we feel, because they're also some of the same chemicals that we describe as hormones, and we know we feel differently when hormones shift, right? So our behavior, our emotions, our thoughts that follow this shift in safety, or a sense of safety, is in no way, shape or form any evidence of any incapability in ourselves. We're just as valid and capable as we always have been. It's just the environment's changing, and the brain can't predict as accurately as it was, and that's why you're going to feel the way you've just expressed it. You feel on the screen there, and it's this context that matters much more than character. So what's our brain doing? What does it do to us? Why do we have this negative part of life? And like I said a minute ago, it's because it's a part of our defense mechanisms. And it's not just a threat to income or what tasks we do. Sometimes it's about identity, because our brain uses language in an incredible way to frame and tell stories. We heard from Bryn, didn't we, Joe? About the storytelling that we do, and in his case, I watched that episode and it was fantastic and very moving, because we can really talk ourselves into, in his world, becoming murderers. Even it was horrendous to see how that self-talk had got that guy to go down that particular route in life. But we all do it to ourselves in various ways. That was just extreme. So, when we think about identity, and our brain uses language to describe, semantic meaning around roles and belonging and contribution, they become anchors for safety and self-worth. So when those anchors are threatened because this imposed change comes along, and in some case forcibly stripped away, the nervous system interprets that as risk. So, I think straight away we go into sort of a bit of detail. When we've got this inbound sensory stimulus through our senses, it lands in the thalamus, and the thalamus is like a little control tower for landing all the information where it should go in the brain, like which plane's landing on which runway. And as soon as we can't make a prediction error that we're safe, that bypasses the thalamus and the amygdala lights up, and everybody's heard about amygdala hijack and all the things that that's doing to us. So, if you recognize identity threat for what it is, that sense that you might get like you're losing a part of yourself, if you can interpret that as just biology doing what it should do, it really helps separate you from, what's currently changing around you. And therefore you can retain that sense of self and sense of purpose, no matter what environment you're experiencing. And I'll talk to this from a personal point of view in a little while. I'll give you an example. But just now, I want to just really take a couple of minutes to sit back and let you watch this, because it's just a fantastic little 2.9-minute video on how language works in the brain. So just listen to this, and I think it's fascinating. I hope you do too. You can hear it, Joe, yeah?
This is a map of
Yes.
someone's brain, showing roughly which areas respond when they hear different words. For example, there's a small area in the middle frontal gyrus that reliably responds to hearing the word top. But it's not just one word, one location. A single word can activate a whole range of different brain regions. So we find the word top in a bit of brain that seems to respond to words associated with clothing and appearances, but also here with numbers and measurements, and here with buildings and places. We usually think of language as being restricted to certain sections, like the temporal lobe. So researchers were surprised to find activity all across the brain and in both hemispheres. The map was made by scientists at the University of California, Berkeley. They put volunteers in an MRI scanner and had them listen to stories for 2 hours.
Back in the front again, deep, deep, and she pulls out a pack of matches that have been laundered at least once.
By monitoring blood flow to different parts of the brain, they worked out which places were responding to the meaning of the words, the semantics. They found that different bits of the brain responded to different kinds of words and concepts. And they could group them into rough categories, shown here by the different colours. Dark green bits, for example, were most activated by words to do with numbers, red bits by social words, Here in the right temporoparietal junction, this speck of brain, just a few millimetres across, was found to respond to words like wife, mother, pregnant, and family. And this bit just next door responds to some of the same social words like family and wife, but also words to do with places and people like house and owner. Generally, the concepts represented in each brain region relate to other functions that scientists already know about. So words to do with how things look, such as stripes, are likely to be found near the visual cortex. And although each individual's map is different, looking at these three brains, it's clear that different people have the same kinds of concepts in the same kinds of places. This is the first time we've been able to map the semantic systems of the brain in such detail, discovering that words are grouped by meaning and revealing just how complicated and widespread the word maps in our heads really are. And the brain map is available online for anyone to explore.
Okay, so yeah, I mean that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, it helps you see. I mean, I'm fascinated when they show. I think it's the third word top, and you see bus next to it. It shows you how neurons close to each other are conflating words like bus stop but bus and top also feature separately. Which is fascinating for me. But it really, if you think about that process I just explained in terms of believe, think, feel, act, and we'll get into this in a bit more detail a bit later, but that TF element, the thinking, feeling, when the cells are going to fire, they have to release chemicals across the synapse. And so if the words we've got, the semantic meaning of the words, as we've just seen in that video, are predominantly negative, then it's going to release chemicals associated to negativity. It's going to raise stress levels. It's going to increase cortisol levels. If we keep looking for signs of benefit, then we're going to increase dopamine artificially. And if you raise dopamine and cortisol together, it has a negative impact on serotonin, which you actually need to regulate overthinking in the prefrontal cortex so that you start to worry more and you become more anxious because you haven't got the serotonin to put the brakes on that overthinking. So, how we think is incredibly important. And, there's another sort of psychology-based assumption, finding, let's say, from all the studies that have been done in the past, that generally speaking, we've got a 70% negativity bias also as part of our defense mechanism. So, it's easier to fill the gaps in our predictions. So when the world becomes unsafe, we're predicting ahead, and then we're seeing prediction error, and we're not safe anymore. Our brain's going to say, what have I experienced before? What's the worst outcome I might have to face here? Let's prepare for it and fill those gaps from that negativity bias point of view with negatives. And all the time we do that, we're going to keep triggering the negative, the neurotransmitters associated to negative emotions and feelings. So it's brilliant because it keeps us alive, right? It keeps us safe. But it's terrible in modern society because we're predominantly safe most of the time anyway. So when we do get a threat that comes along, like, a change in job or role or something, we get the same kind of primal response. And it doesn't serve us so well. So it's up to us to learn that mechanism and do something about it productively. So again, if it's uncertainty, so some key words that we've got here is uncertainty, and the future being unclear. And if we're doing that and we're scanning for risk, this heightened state of being alert all the time is why most people feel exhausted. And we saw some of those words on the word cloud, and irritable or mentally overloaded. And it's all to do with this uncertainty and period of instability because of this prediction error. So the discomfort is not because you're coping badly, it's because the brain prefers predictability and efficiency from a glucose energy consumption rate, because it's, like I said earlier, it's metabolically taxing to process something brand new in the world, a new environment, a new experience that you've not been able to predict before. And so when uncertainty slips away, you are going to find that your energy drains. So, all of the things we saw in that word cloud are completely explainable and understandable and normal and natural to be feeling. But I've found, again, through my life, the more I understand this, when things have gone wrong, like my catastrophic computer crash at the weekend, I'm very capable of regulating my emotional response, even though it looked like I'd lost 5 years of business data. Fortunately, I got it back. But in that moment, I kind of went, okay, right. I can hear the inner voice starting to go, what if, all the worst case scenarios, And I thought, this is my brain doing what it's designed to do. I'm not going to function effectively and sort this problem out if I'm in panic mode. So I just applied what I teach to myself and went through it. And it took 3 days to go through 10 layers of IT solutions. And basically completely rebuild my Mac from scratch. But I saved it and I got all the information back. So it's the same situation that you guys are facing: uncertainty. You don't know what the future looks like. You might have to do something different. And what you want to do is regulate your emotional response when you're going through it, so that you can do the best job of sorting out a solution. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And again, we mentioned Bryn earlier. And I've mentioned filling in gaps already, but it's when the information is incomplete. And of course, the situation you're facing, the information is complete. You don't know what life might look like in 2 or 3 months' time, and you are going to start filling in those gaps with the stories. And again, we talk about self-sabotage and things like that, but your brain's not lying to you. It's just attempting to restore some kind of coherence and ability to predict. So, depending on the stories we tell, which is, no, I'm perfectly okay, and this is just the way my brain's designed to work. I'm bound to feel like this, but I can regulate it. That's a very different story to, oh my goodness, chicken licking, the world's crashing down on me, everything's going to change and I'm never going to survive and I don't know what I'm going to do next. It's the difference in the words, as we've just seen with the brain dictionary video, that changes the way you feel. So some narratives are going to reduce anxiety, some narratives are going to amplify it, and becoming aware that those stories are constructions rather than facts just gives you that opportunity to take a breath, to create some space, and to just tap back into thinking rationally and not emotionally. And you literally don't have to believe every thought your brain generates. So when it says, I'm not going to be able to pay the mortgage, I can't feed the kids, I can't turn the heating on, what am I going to do for a job, those are all just predictions. If you understand that, you can go, yeah, thanks brain, thanks for giving me the idea that this is going to be a possible outcome, but actually I think that I can make some moves to counteract that and I'm going to be fine. And as soon as what's happening as well is your brain's running on autopilot. It's got it's running at 2 million bits of data per second, scanning the environment for safety and making these predictions. We only become aware of 56 bits of data per second. So, but the beautiful thing about that is you've got all of that brain presenting a story to you based on your fear. And if you override that consciously with your prefrontal cortex, the signals that get sent back to the brain is, okay, that's handy, but I don't want to do that right now. And then what it starts to do through neurogenesis and neuroplasticity is update the neural wiring firing pattern, so your autopilot actually updates. So it's not quick, it's not going to happen in the next few months, but if you practice this stuff over years, it does change the way your brain functions, and you just become a more positive person that doesn't get so stressed out about things. And then when change comes around again in life, because it inevitably does, I've been made redundant 4 times in my career, that you learn how to just cope with it, and it's fine, and everything always turns out all right in the end. So it's all about how you respond and not about the environment, really, that it's all about, that makes a difference to quality of life. But also, and we're going to talk a bit more about neurodiversity in a little bit as well, but we all think differently. We've got, they say that it's 40% genetic and 60% experiential. So we've got, this precondition, this genetic predisposition to being who we are. And therefore, what we experience, which is infinitely variable in life as well, changes which parts of the brain develop in which ways, which is why when we saw the brain map, it said, look at these 3 brains. And, the same kind of words feature in the same kind of places, but they're going to be different for everybody, which means we've all would hear a word like frustration, and we would make emotional connections and associations to that, to different life experience. So frustration for one person will be very different from frustration for another. Right? So we think and process things differently, and we focus on things differently, and therefore brains prioritize detail. Sometimes others prioritize patterns or possibilities. Some move fast, others deliberate carefully. The differences are real, but the key thing here is to realize they all kind of sit on top of shared biological foundations. Every brain responds to threat, uncertainty, belonging, reward, using the same core chemistry, right? We've all got the same 2 hemispheres. I'd say all. That there's exceptions out there, and we've seen the strange, Facebook videos about the boy with no brain and still functioning normally. So let's say, on the normal continuum that we bump into in everyday life, we can say use generic broad brush words like all. but we all respond to these things, let's say belonging, reward, that kind of stuff, using that same chemistry. We've all got these two hemispheres. We've all got the different lobes. We've all got, the visual cortex, the hippocampus, a Broca's and Wernicke's region, and all that kind of stuff. We fundamentally made of the same stuff, and it's designed to work in fundamentally the same way. So, if we didn't get picked for the sports team, we felt disappointed. If we suddenly realized the bully was standing behind us when we bowed mouthing them to our best friend, we all had that stomach falling out kind of emotional response, because it's a fear-based response, and we all do the same thing. And if we've all got a bullying boss or a micromanager around us, we all get the same kind of frustrations and get wound up and then go home and let it out on the kids. And we all act the same ways because the brain's designed to work the same. So if we get that, if we just understand that and work with it instead of against it, it not only allows us to have more compassion for each other and be more supportive of each other, because we can think, oh, I wonder what their brain's going through, and it just changes the language and the positioning and the context, but it allows us to do the same for ourselves as well. It allows us not to beat ourselves up. It allows us to move away from labeling and separation and I'm like this and I'm like that kind of language in our heads. It's just my brain's doing what it's doing, which is fine, based on what my life experience, and if I tap into that and work with that, I'm going to get through this better than if I don't. Hopefully it's all making sense. But I mean, we talk about brains changing and the fact that we're designed to adapt, and this is sort of not actual brain footage because we can't do that yet, right? But I think, is it Campanot or Campanot chambers designed for neurite growth studies? We put them in a sort of a nutrient soup in Petri dishes and basically grow some neurons. And this is one of the nice little videos that shows neurons actually growing. And it's a great metaphor for neuroplasticity. So what this is, I mean, the way I present this when I do talks around the world is that this is what's happening to all of our brains all the time. Right, if we've got an established wiring pattern, this isn't firing, of course, this is just wiring reaching out and connecting with each other. So this is the wiring bit, this is the beliefs, this is, if you think something's good, bad, right or wrong, there's got to be a wiring pattern to represent that. And this is just showing those wires connecting with each other. But when those wires fire, we are going to get thoughts, we are going to trigger that release of emotions. But we're also going to constantly update and adapt all the time. If we've got an established wiring pattern, so they've all done all their growing and we've had a lot of life to convince ourselves that this is the route we take to work, this is the desk we sit at, this is what we do each day, these are the faces we see, this is the music we hear at lunchtime when we have our Burger King in the foyer or whatever it might be. If that's such a consistent repetitive process, that wiring pattern is going to be very strong. So if you now have to think about, I can't use that wiring pattern anymore, your brain has to process this isn't valid anymore, it can't predict safety from this wiring pattern, it's going to have to form a new wiring pattern. Now that is what I've used this phrase a couple of times, metabolically taxing. And if you think about it, we don't want to use too much glucose energy to survive and live, because we've got to go and find food, and historically that would put us at risk, right? So there's these deep sort of connections to be at risk and in danger and exposing ourselves to the wild, and this brain's capacity to try and conserve glucose energy. And I say that's not actual brain footage. This one is. I mean, this is incredible. This was just a couple of years ago. A doctor called Alexandre Dumoulin did a 48-hour time lapse of neurons growing and connecting in a chick embryo. And I think I read when I found it and looked it up, it's that this is actually neurons, actual live neurons in a chick embryo growing across the spinal cord. So this one's quite impressive to see. The point of showing you these things is that, we, I mean, this is new technology, right? This is using confocal microscopy. If I've said that right, you probably know that better than I do as well. It's the fact is we change. We are designed to adapt. We're designed to be able to cope with change. It's going to feel awkward and it's going to feel depressing and we're going to feel frustrated, because that's part of our defense mechanisms. That's our coping strategies. But we are designed to adapt and change. And I think just knowing that helps, because if you think that, one day, if you were a caveman, you were wandering around and a tree had fallen down and you couldn't get to your food source, that then you've got to adapt and find a new way around the fallen tree to get to the food source. And this, in principle, is no different. Our world is changing. We're designed to adapt to it. Yes, we're going to have an emotional response, but that's fine. That's what we're designed to do. And now, because of neuroscience, we've got all the evidence and the capacity to prove that. So, again, why is my logo in the bottom backwards? Joe kindly pointed that out earlier, and I did say it is purposeful. It's because we're such a complex organism. We don't just work in one direction, right? So we've got a wiring pattern established through genetics and experience, and it fires, and it's got a chemical component that means we have emotions, and we act and react to our situation to survive in the world like that. But we've got to think about it the other way as well. So we interact with the world, like now you're getting sensory stimulus from me talking and seeing my hands wave all over the place. Now, depending on how your brain's wired, and whether it uses its HTM, its hierarchical temporal memory, to assess that, inbound sensory stimulus at 2 million bits of data per second to say, am I safe or not from this guy? You're going to have an emotional response. So the action comes first in this way round, then the feeling, the threat, because if it's dangerous to us and the brain's already predicted before we're consciously aware of it that there's risk, i.e., which is why we swerve if somebody suddenly steps out in front of us when we're driving on the road, or we jump when we hear a loud bang, or because that's how fast in milliseconds we're reacting, and that's got an emotional component. So before we can think it through and decide whether we were safe or not in any given situation, we're going to react emotionally because that's what keeps us alive, right? So it's AFTB as much as BTFA is. It's interact with the world, be safe at an emotional level, then process it from a thinking perspective to reflect, Socratic reflection, Hansai, if you know the Japanese stuff, and really see how we responded and whether it served us or not. And thinking that through will help trigger that neurogenesis and neural rewiring so that we form different beliefs. And like I said, our autopilot becomes something else. And because how emotional reactions are arriving before conscious reasoning, that's just simply what it is. That's our design, and it's perfectly okay. So it's gonna happen. You can't opt out of having a brain of the way it works. So don't criticize yourself for having one. Don't think that there's something wrong with you for feeling bad in a change situation. It's perfectly natural and normal. What you got to do is learn to work with it, and therefore you'll be in a much better place much sooner than if you don't. Because if we then start blaming ourselves, predicting or projecting on our blame on ourselves to say, this is ridiculous, why am I feeling like this? What's wrong with me? That's all that negative narrative in our heads that are going to make us feel worse. And it's just going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy in the negative rather than a self-fulfilling prophecy in the positive. So the other part of this, again, we talked briefly about identity and how we define ourselves and give ourselves labels, dad, mum, colleague, whatever else it might be. But there's another whole part of this, which is about belonging to the tribe, right? So, we survive, we've evolved to survive in groups. We are a herd animal, essentially, being mammals. And so belonging is not like a social preference. It's a biological safety signal. It's something we have to have. We're not going to survive very well without it. And this is why loneliness is one of the biggest killers on the planet, beside cancer. So, when our connection to a group or team or institution feels threatened, if we define ourselves as being part of the NHS, that's a huge signal to the rest of the brain, right? So if that's you've got this message that says that might be taken away, and I've said it 3 times now, the brain's going to interpret that as risk. And it doesn't. People stay in abusive relationships because having something that's consistent that the brain's already processed and knows how to manage is better than the unknown. Okay, so even if we are in a situation where we moan about the systems and the computers don't work and we're walking down corridors and the Wi-Fi drops out and we have to re-sign in when we get to the ward at the other end of the corridor because we know how big hospitals are, that happens, I know. All of those things, or whether leadership's not great and somebody's immature and they shouldn't really be promoted to their level. What's it called? The Peter principle. There's people being promoted to their level of incompetence, right? We see that in business a lot, and I'm sure it probably happens in all sectors. So all of these things are bad, and guess what? We complain about them because we need that social connection. We want to offload our baggage to people and get some sympathy because that raises oxytocin levels and we feel connected. And at least if everything else is bad, we've got that trust. Now, if that's being taken away, that's a huge signal to the brain that you're exposed, right? So, even if you've been complaining about your systems and your leaders, and you can't understand why you still feel so bad about that possibly being taken away, it's because you still are more prone to feeling unsettled, deeply unsettled by detachment from the group than you are about the details that run on a daily basis. So if you think along these lines, I think it all helps to explain why change that alters team structures or identity, even if we just have restructure and not redundancy, can feel far more destabilizing than we might anticipate. And again, I've mentioned it already, but I mean, just to blend that picture across to another one, because I added that one, Joe, you didn't see that one earlier. You know, it goes back to these primal things. If you ever wonder why people react and act the way they do, it's because their brains are doing exactly what they're designed to do, and yours is too. You know, it's all about avoiding risk, conserving energy, and staying in your comfort zone so that life's as easy as possible, because it's less glucose consuming, less metabolically taxing. You know, and it comes back to, like I said, primal kind of fears and what we had to survive. We don't have to go and hunt woolly mammoths and survive saber-toothed tigers now. We just have to survive social environments and technology. Okay, and it's a very different landscape, but the brain's doing very much the same things as it always did. So what does it mean to feel valued? You know, it's emotional, not chemical. Sorry, it's chemical, not emotional. Is the long and short of it, because of the way the brain fires. I'll just keep my eye on time. I'm going to whiz through this a little bit quicker because I want Joe's input on a couple of the slides that are coming up. These are written so that the notes that come with them would make sense if you want to reflect. So hopefully, if I do just sort of like go through a couple, then it will make sense when you inherit them later. But again, going back to the BTFA model, we talk about emotions. It's a proxy term. It's a label. What's actually happening is chemicals are shifting in brain synapses. Okay, so that's really important to understand, because it's about how do we regulate our emotions by regulating our thinking. That's going to help us get through any kind of change environment. And this is what I'm teaching to leaders all over the world. And again, it comes back to that. I mean, if you know the term metacognition, thinking about your thinking, that's the capacity to notice what the mind is doing without completely being pulled along by it. You know, so have some agency over yourself, and therefore observe your thoughts, listen to what that inner voice is saying without just responding to it and reacting to it. And if you have to, check and challenge it and push back on it and say, no, I don't want to think like that right now. It's not going to do me any good. Now I understand this process. And again, just to put some images to it, or we kind of see, we're talking about, we've all got neurons that on that left-hand picture there. When that glucose, and we go from a resting state of minus 70 millivolts in a neuronal cell, and it spikes to plus 30. And then when that happens, then that electrical charge gets down the axon through the myelinated axon and triggers the release, you know, an ionic level. You get sodium ions, potassium ions, and whatever opening channels and gates in the synapse to be able to let the neurotransmitters across the gap. So, you know, you can't deny this. These facts. This is the way we are built to work, and we're just fortunate. I mean, look at on the bright side, we're so fortunate today to have this knowledge to be able to explain it. Philosophers have been looking for these answers for millennia and getting themselves confused. But it is biological. It's not metaphorical, and you know, just work with yourself and accept yourself for who you are, and it's going to be a lot better. So I said earlier, I'll tell you a story about my own situation. I've got a couple of brief stories to tell. One was, you know, one of these surprise redundancies. I was in a director's position. Life was pretty good. The girls were going into secondary school when they were younger. So this is going back quite a bit now because they're both just leaving university. But I had a young man inherit his father's company, tell me in no uncertain terms with expletives I won't repeat, you know, your salary will look much better as my period, so goodbye. And the words were a lot stronger than that. So, you know, a few battles later, I found myself out of work, and I thought, okay, great, I'll find another job. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I'll step into a new role. 1 year went past to the day without being able to find a job. Don't know what was going on, but the 20th of December to the 20th of December, I was out of work. I did some part-time work fixing windscreens. I was earning a few £100s a month just to cover food, and all my debts were going through the roof. But I knew what I teach by this point in time. I just hadn't formalised it into the course we now deliver. But I was still applying it to myself. And the one thing I remember everybody saying to me above everything else was, I can't believe what you're going through. We had to sell the house. We had to move 3 times. We moved the kids' secondary schools twice, you know, just to try and survive. We had to sell everything we had, emptied the garage, sold my lathe, sold my motorbikes, you know, got rid of any of debt that we were hanging on to. Everything in life turned upside down on its head. And everybody said to me, I can't believe what you're going through. You're still so positive all the time. And I, you know, the point was, what other choice is there? You know, what are you going to do? Fall into a pit of self-pity? Because how are you going to present to a potential employer when you do get an interview if you're in a bad state in yourself, you've got to stay upbeat and positive. And that you can do that if you understand that mechanism that's working behind the scenes and how it works. So I'm living testimony to that because I've done it in practice. And that's very different from the time I got made redundant in my 20s. You know, when I was chicken licking and felt the whole world was falling down and I was never going to get another job again. So, you know, you can do this stuff. It's possible. And that was very traumatic. And since then, you know, my mum passed away. We had a car stolen. We had lots of different things, and I've been able to be pretty upbeat and positive about, you know, through most of it, because it's just knowing this stuff. Okay, it's a change in sensory stimulus, but what are you going to do? So again, you know, go back to this point about defining yourself through a narrow set of roles or titles, and think about that what's being threatened and whether that links to your sense of self, and whether it's that's impacting your locus of control, whether you feel like you've got agency and you can choose your route in the world, or whether the world's being done to you and you're a victim. All right, so it's all of that comes back down to tapping in through metacognition to how you think, and you change your thinking because of the chemical element. You change your thinking, and you need to put yourself first. It's not vanity, you know, it's how identity is constructed in the brain. It's how you want to be able to have the best quality of life, and therefore you get this stuff right and it all works. So anyway, I'm mumbling because I'm thinking about getting to the bit I want Joe's to chip in on. So again, when it comes to purpose, we talk about prediction and what gives us value, and I think some of you might have done that, you know, that's thing that we mentioned at the beginning, that little study we sent out. Just to give you a bit of opportunity to reflect, it's what is it that actually shifts that chemical balance in your brain? What is it that gives you a sense of pride, belonging, you know, and satisfaction that comes from that shift in dopamine and serotonin mix? That's what we're really trying to do. You know, we've got all the words around it. What we're trying to do is regulate that chemical shift in our brains. And if we tap into things that give us pleasure, you know, whether it's supporting the grandchildren learning how to fish, you know, pottery, wherever it might be, sounds superficial if you're thinking, yeah, but I've got to pay the bills, I've got to get a job. But actually, if you're going to be in a better place to get that job and be in a better positive position in your mind if you are doing some of these things that you know, give you some satisfaction and pleasure in life. So don't just sort of shut everything out, knuckle down, and just keep applying for jobs, because that constant rejection process, because of the way algorithms work in recruitment agents these days, you know, that's just going to keep reinforcing the fact that this isn't going in the right direction. That's going to spiral out of control. So get out of the loop, make sure you take some time for yourself and do something that makes you feel good. You know, a bit of volunteering if you've got some time on your hands, you know, in between applications and whatever else it might be. So coming back to the bit that Joe told me about when we were chatting about this, and we are 1:45, so we'll go through this reasonably quickly too, Joe. But yeah, we had a chat, didn't we, about the difference in, because I was just been doing some work with Buckingham University about neurodiversity, and it linked back into different brains and the fact that men and women have got different pressures on them, just culturally and socially, and there is this sort of masculine expectation that you know is linked to strength and provision and success. And my daughter, I was just saying, is just leaving university. She's going out with a lovely guy called Will. And he's a power lifter, and he's absolutely ripped. So he's always talking about, you know, primal man and being able to see your jawline, and you know, so his language talks about the way he looks in his physique, but and he talks about being a man, you know, being able to provide. And you see it, he's in his 20s, right? So he's got a lot to learn. But he's, you know, this is the social expectation. It is a cultural norm that we've all imprinted by through life. The language that we talk about when it comes to men and women's differently sets us up to think like this. It's the way how we're conditioned. So when that identity is closely tied to being dependable, financially secure, you know, again, that disruption, you know, it can trigger shame or all sorts of different emotional responses. But the bit that Joe talked to me about was the more technical bit around testosterone. Joe, do you want to explain, because you probably do a better job than I will.
And it came from work that a guy called Ryan Park. I'll put a link in the chat so that you can have a look at it. And it was to do with the rates of men's suicide, but also to do with rates of heart attacks in men. And there was one day of the year that statistically was greater than any other for men to die from heart attacks. And everybody, if we had the time, would make you all guess which day of the year it was. And you kind of think, was it Christmas, New Year? Is it birthday? And it's the day that the clocks go back. And that might seem a very strange thing, but what it means is that you get one less hour of sleep. And sleep is the restorative part of your daily cycle that increases the level of testosterone in men. And when that testosterone drops, it has a physiological impact on the heart, but also on the sense of mood and feelings of well-being. And they explored how this then impacts on men when they are presented with things like what else impacts on testosterone that could be a predictor for either suicide or heart attacks. And things like whether their football team was successful or not, or the sporting team, the tribe that they belong to, that's got the scarf and the flag, whether or not they were successful or not. And it didn't matter whether they were playing football or you were playing chess, so it wasn't physical, or you were watching it. If your tribe or yourself was deemed to be the loser in that sense, that you lost that particular competition, testosterone levels plummeted. And it was a greater predictor for people to have heart attacks, but also suicide, than if they'd been successful, in which case it went up. So being able to understand how those things can affect you physiologically, emotionally, as well as biologically, is important to be aware of, and how you can plug that gap. So if you are a fan of a football team that is not always on the winning side, or you belong to a tribe that you feel that, sometimes that you feel like you're losing out, or you're losing a sense of identity, or it's not successful, the thing that will reinvigorate that level within the biological sense is if you watch your greatest hits, something positive, something that shows success, and it will balance out that negative impact. And so we see that in men, and that was a really insightful thing. Have a look at the site, because we all, whether you're a man or you're a woman working with men, or have a spouse or partner, or members of your family, it's important to support them through change of ways that they are biologically impacted. And it's the same with women as well. And it might be that you're neurodivergent, or that you hit the menopause, and that has other biological impacts on you. So when you're presented with change, you have a whole set of additional things that might be factors that impact on your health and well-being. So understanding and being able to respond to those is also really important. I'll put another couple of links in the chat to follow up on, but we'll send them out with the slides.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. I mean, and again, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's great that we've got these studies going on around the world, but it really links to something very important for men and women, which is if your stress levels up, your cortisol levels are up, that has an impact on your circadian rhythm, and your suprachiasmatic nucleus, and all those kind of things are affected, which is all your body clock. So you can go out of whack and you stop sleeping so much. And we know now, and we're still investigating the way potentially the diaphragm and the lungs help push the spinal fluid up and down, and clean and flush the brain at night. But you've got oligodendrocytes and all these other neuron and glial cells and the whatever doing all this adaptation and change. And to be able to stay clean and fresh, the brain needs that flushing process, and it also needs to rebalance the chemical like testosterone, as Joe just explained. And so if you're not getting the sleep, even though you're stressed, it's going to make things worse. So and the same thing comes from too much sugar in food. Eat healthy foods, sleep well, as best as you can, because these will all help regulate that stress response, and therefore be in a better place to make more informed action. Keep that glucose energy away from the amygdala and powering the prefrontal cortex, so you can make rational, informed decisions about how you're feeling, how you're thinking, and what you're going to do to rectify the situation you find yourself in. So all of it becomes important, because we are a system ultimately. So the last bit on it is, and again, I'll just talk actually back on the last slide briefly before I talk about a little bit of neurodiversity, that menopausal ladies, perimenopause, which I can speak to personally because I'm watching my poor wife go through it at the moment, bless her, and it's just, she's got a little bit OCD, and she's perfectly fine with me telling people this because it helps others. But what happens when estrogen drops is that it's a neuromodulator, so it helps. It's a bit like serotonin. It kind of sits neutral. It can become positive and negative and help regulate things. So if that's suddenly dropped at a hormonal level due to age, all of the other the tendencies, the firing patterns in the brain can become more active because they're not having the brakes put on, kind of thing. So poor Steph, she's seen her OCD levels go through the roof, and be frustrated by the fact that she just simply can't regulate the way her brain's responding to what were previously controllable triggers. And so, recognize these things, that every chemical shift that is occurring because of your age, because of your sex, because of your environment, this is what determines quality of life. And so the big thing is focus on what can you do to regulate your emotional, your chemical shifts and chemical balance, and that's going to put you in a better place than anything else that you can do. And again, from a neurodiverse point of view, I mentioned the University of Buckingham a minute ago. I've been doing some work with those guys down there in the dyslexia hub, and did a talk last year on ADHD and being on the spectrum at different levels. And literally, what came out of it for me was that it's just about the genetic predisposition for brains to be wired to use, a bit more language through the right hemisphere than the left hemisphere. So we typically think of Broca's and Wernicke's region as language processing to control, fine motor control in our tongues and our throats and process and produce language. But actually, as we saw in the video earlier, language happens all over the brain, and the way it's processed from an ADHD point of view will be more more strongly myelinated axons on the back end of neurons in the right hemisphere than perhaps somebody that's dyslexic or on slightly autistic and is very detail focused will be left brain sort of strong myelinated neurons. And what's became very apparent is actually what we call normal is probably the minority, somewhere in the middle of that kind of brain wiring. And if we add sort of one end of the spectrum and the other end of the spectrum together, which is still perfectly normal brain function, that's what normal is, as well. It's just, we need to not say that there are conditions and there's problems. It's actually just normal on a wider continuum than we've been able to accept in society. So if you do have any thinking pattern type that you've labeled yourself with, one end of the scale or the other, don't worry, it's fine, you're perfectly normal as well. There's nothing wrong with that, but do recognize you will process the situation you're in differently. You will focus on the detail about whether the full stop was in the right place on your CV, or whether you can see that this is all because of geopolitics, and the government didn't have to respond like this. When you're an ADHD just thinking big picture kind of person, right? You're gonna process it differently, which is why you'll have different emotional responses. But just work with it. You're not wrong. You're perfectly fine and normal, and we're all somewhere on that continuum. So don't beat yourselves up, please. This is the most important message. And then just quickly, just to wrap up, if you do get into that situation where you've got to go and put yourself into a new environment, you've got to go for an interview, you've got to do something new, you may even perhaps just apply for your own job. I want to give you a message that you can, this whole kind of brain body thing that we've been talking about in pop psychology for 30 years actually works, and now we've got the neuroscience to kind of back it up. It's easier to understand, but I've literally put it in practice myself. I was years and years and years ago, previous version of the company I've now got, still trying to teach the same stuff to people. I was in a tractor manufacturing plant in Basildon, and my business partner was at the front really bigging me up, mate, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, Martin, shush, I've got a lot to live up to if you keep blowing smoke everywhere. So I thought, no, this is really, and my brain started going around on the negative thoughts, and I realized that my palms were sweaty, my knees were shaking, I was breathing, my chest was tight, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm starting to feel like I'm nervous, anxious. Yeah, but I've done this before. It's there were 36 managers in the room. I had to go into the front and speak to them, and I thought, what is it I'm teaching people, that I can't be a hypocrite? I can't not do this for myself in a moment like this. And I took the deep breaths. I literally put a pen in my mouth and did the whole kind of send the muscle and the signals back to the brain through the vagus nerve stuff, and within 30 seconds I'd calmed down. I walked up to the front of the room confidently and gave a really good talk. So you can regulate these emotions even in stressful environments in the moment as well. It's not just a long-term thing. So just learn what your brain's doing, learn to work with it, and whether it's the long the big picture in the long term you're trying to navigate, or the short term moments, if you work with your brain, you can get much better outcomes. So just remember, it's a system. You know, we talk about heartfelt, head, hands, and heart. Forget all that. The only thing about your heart is that it's a pump and it's sending signals back to your brain, so it knows if it needs to go a bit faster when you stand up, right? Or whether you've got to run away from something dangerous. It's all about brain function. It's all about neurochemistry. And just the final word for me, look, if I'm just an engineer from Essex, and I just happen to be curious and read a lot. If I can get to a point where I can understand this stuff, teach it to other people and apply it to myself, then everybody on this call can too. So that's it from me. We've got a few minutes, I hope, for some questions. No, we're dead on time, so sorry.
We're dead on
we can
time,
stay back.
but
I haven't got a time dead stop if you want to run over. And
anybody wants to stay on, David will answer some questions now. Thank you, David. That's been fascinating insights, really valuable. Hopefully everybody feels a little bit more positive now that you've got control and you can be the one in charge and you know, own how you feel and how you respond to things. Do look on the website, because David's we'll send out the things from David's session today, but there's also the other ones from Change Under Pressure to equip you to get through this in the best way you can. If we do have any questions, do put your hands up. If not, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, David, for such brilliant insights. Really valuable, and I think, you know, judging by what people are putting in the chat, very much appreciated, and I think what really people are needing right now. So thank you, and if you do have any questions, do stick your hand up. But if not, thank you again, and we will see you next time.